Hello and welcome. The Purdue Institute for the Study of the Iranian World welcomes you to another episode of our podcast, Legacies of Ancient Persia. Join us as we further explore the many legacies of ancient Persia and its relevance to global patrimony. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Legacies of Ancient Persia. This week's guest is Dr. Jennifer Finn, an associate professor and chair of the Department of Classical Studies at Loyola University. In this episode, we chat about her research focus on Alexander the Great's military strategies and the cultural exchanges between Greeks and Persians, explore the complexities of learning ancient languages like Akkadian and Sumerian, and reflections on the challenges of studying Persian history through limited source material, and insights into the representation of Persian history in media, emphasizing the need for a more nuanced and balanced portrayal. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you like what you hear, please give our show a 5-star rating and review us on Apple or Spotify. Okay, well, welcome to Legacies. I'm excited to get into this conversation, but got to start with the basics. So, please tell us, our wonderful audience, how did you get into classics and ancient history?
So I started taking Latin when I was in high school my freshman year of high school, because my sister had done it and I wanted to be just like my sister. She didn't end up doing anything with her Latin, but I immediately loved it because it was just like this difficult puzzle that I loved trying to put together every day. And I had decided already when I applied to college that I was going to be a Latin major. Like that was just going to be it. There were no questions about the job market or the utility of my degree. It just didn't even matter to me. I was just going for it. And so along the way, I took a lot of courses in classical civilization, and that included a ancient warfare course with David Potter. And I continued on. I got a master's at Columbia, and I knew after that, because I had audited several courses in ancient history there, that I wanted to be an ancient historian. And so I applied again to Michigan because they had this interdepartmental program in Greek and Roman history, which is called something different now. But I applied as a Roman Republican historian, which is silly to me now since I care nothing for the Roman Republic. But, it's fine because I got in, and pretty immediately, I was thinking that I was interested in doing something on warfare. And so I took a course with David again on Arrian's Anabasis. And I thought, okay, maybe I'll start writing a dissertation on Alexander's use of weaponry, strategy, logistics, this kind of thing. I quickly found out that topic was pretty much done already, and it also wasn't really interesting me in the way that I thought it might. And so I started to look into the ways that Alexander was using, adopting, manipulating some of the cultural heritage, both stories and actual material artifacts of the peoples with whom he was coming into contact in the ancient Near East. And a lot of that became interesting to me because I took a course on Achaemenid art with Margaret Root. And so I thought, okay, that seems like a good place to write a thesis. So I started doing that, but ultimately I realized that I didn't really have the expertise in the ancient Near East that I needed in order to do the project properly. And so I asked the Middle Eastern Studies Department at Michigan if I could start sitting in on Akkadian classes and learn cuneiform so that I could read all of 5 cuneiform documents that talk about Alexander's journey in the ancient Near East. And so they happily took me on, and I started learning cuneiform languages, and that became very interesting to me. And by the time that master's degree was finished, I felt like I wasn't going to be the complete scholar that I wanted to be unless I completed a PhD in Assyriology. And so I went to Munich and I did a very truncated PhD in Assyriology, but I took a full course load. I wrote another dissertation on subversion of power in First Millennium Empire, so how scribes try to invert or subvert the rhetoric of royal propaganda as a way to very subtly criticize kingship. And I published that dissertation really kind of as a prerequisite for graduation from that program. And then I returned to Alexander with a renewed perspective on things. And so now, I'm kind of working mostly on Achaemenid military culture. So I've written a couple of things on grand strategy. So not so much how they're using their weaponry or what their strategy is on the battlefield, but more how, as an empire, they're sort of formulating their own global strategy. And also, I still think a lot about Alexander. It's hard for me to get away from that guy. But, he did a lot of really interesting things in the Near East, and he seems to have absorbed Near Eastern traditions in a really kind of unique way. So I'm still pretty fascinated by that. And also, sort of Greek cultural contacts with the Achaemenids and how transformative those were for Greek and Persian culture. So I think we tend to think about those contacts, or I think maybe not so much anymore, but scholars used to think about those contacts really as a sort of one-way street. But now it's really pretty clear that those kinds of interactions were mutually beneficial. And so I find that kind of research really fascinating. So that's kind of how I ended up where I ended up. So I'm the sort of token ancient Near Eastern historian at Loyola. But if I need to do Greco-Roman stuff, Greek, Latin, whatever it may be, I can do that. And so, a lot of the times I'm working on Diodorus or other historiographers in the Greco-Roman tradition. So, it's a fun life. Just whatever, if somebody's got a conference and they want me to write something, I'll just do it.
That's the best. Well, clearly, as we have all just heard, you are quite proficient in school and languages because, man, who's like, yeah, I'm gonna, do something, do one, and then go back to school and do more, add on a whole nother language, a whole nother degree track.
You could
And
say it
it's
was procrastination.
That's
You could.
true. It's the best kind, though.
That's right.
Or,
That's
you
right. That's
know.
what I tell my students. I mean, I don't know that I would recommend this path in the current climate, but it worked out really well for me, and I learned a lot because I think it's very valuable to do a degree in another country just to see, the differences in their style. And, I find, for instance, in Europe and the UK, the programs tend to be a lot more attentive to individual needs and interests, and they are more in depth in terms of teaching a student how to do that research rather than, some of these big interpretive ideas that American universities tend to focus on. So I think you'll be great.
Oh, good. Well, one thing that I just thought of on a whim, which is great because I love when things just come to me, is y- the landscape from school. It changes like on a dime, but I'm sure it's vastly different to when you were in grad school to, someone entering now. And I just love how so many, like many people on this podcast, we have a lot of people coming from classics, from other disciplines that find their way right to Persia somehow. And for longtime listeners of the show, they probably know, oh yeah, it's a spider web. Like you're gonna find your way, especially if you have any interest in like Alexander. So it's kind of unavoidable. But do you think you'd do the same thing now and go toward Assyriology? Just because I feel like I've talked to so many grad students. We have grad students, at UCLA who I'm sure are confronted with these decisions where they're like, oh, I like this. I want to learn Akkadian, but then, someone will be like, don't you want like Old Persian? That might be a little more helpful. Like, there's so many options depending on like where you are. I should caveat that very much and say, actually, there's still not a lot of places that offer things like Old Persian, but say you had the chance, right? Would you kind of take your same path or would you fiddle with something, maybe choose a different language to try to approach it, or does it not actually matter because you can kind of get to the same material?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because, really I started out with Achaemenid art, and a lot of that is trilingual inscriptions that accompany, that material culture. And so it was kind of expressed to me, I'm not sure if it was overtly expressed, but it was expressed to me that if you learn Akkadian, then you can just kind of pick up some of the other cuneiform languages more quickly. So it was, well, don't worry about Old Persian because, it's a lot simpler, it has less characters, you can just, do that rather easily. And maybe to some extent that's true because I learned Akkadian at Michigan and then I went to a week-long seminar at Oxford that was run by Wouter Henkelmann, and he taught us Elamite in a week. So it may be that you should try to pick up sort of the more difficult language first, and then the others can come more easily. Admittedly, I never learned Old Persian. The one cuneiform language I will say that I had a ton of difficulty with, and I still could not even try to read it, was Hittite. I just couldn't get it. There was something about the agglutinative nature of that language that my brain could not wrap itself around. So it's not as if all cuneiform languages are the same. I would never argue that. It just simply isn't true. But someone told me that, once you know Akkadian, everything else will be fine. So, and to some extent, like I was taught Sumerian by one of my good friends, actually at UCLA, Gina Konstantopoulos. She was given the great task of teaching me Sumerian in 2 weeks in between semesters so that we could participate in a Akkadian Sumerian bilinguals seminar. And I can't say that my Sumerian after those 2 weeks was perfect, but it was good enough where I could participate. And there again, the Akkadian was helping me try to understand Sumerian. So I think that Akkadian would still be the place that I would start. And that's also because I do enjoy reading the literature. I enjoy reading Gilgamesh and Enuma Elish more, I guess I could say, than I might enjoy royal inscriptions of the Persian Empire, just because, they're not the most captivating reading. Don't tell Darius I said that. But so I do enjoy reading that literature. I mean, there's something different about reading the first line of Gilgamesh than there is about reading the first line of the Cyrus Cylinder. But yeah, so I think I would probably do it the same way actually. And it is one of those things where like once you get the hang of it, it's easier to teach yourself or find someone to tutor you in some of those other languages that don't have as many extant texts. So
Hey, that's good advice because obviously UCLA is an institution that offers a lot of different ancient languages. And I feel like just from talking to people around, like it can be kind of intimidating to try to figure out, okay, but which ones like are actually going to be helpful? Because, as you've stated, like, yeah, some of them, I mean, again, yes, not all cuneiform languages are the same. It's a writing system, but like they're distinctly different. But I don't know, like just because I remember I had this conversation with one of our grad students, and it came up in the funniest circumstance too. I was like watching a random TV show. People on the show don't really need to know that, but it's fine. I was watching a random TV show basically, and then they used like a book of cuneiform signs, and I saw that and I went, "Oh, that's really interesting." So, long story short, I took a photograph of it and I sent it to one of our grad students, and I just said, "Hey, I don't really know any of these languages, but like, what do you think this is? I'm just really curious." Because the show called it Sumerian.
Is it
And
Ancient Aliens, Lexi?
no,
Okay.
I promise it's not. I promise it's not. I would never suggest watching that, especially on this show. No, I'm kidding. But in all seriousness, no, it wasn't. Okay, if anyone who listens to the show is interested, it was IFC's You're the Worst. It's like a comedy horror, like a spoof, kind of like Shaun of the Dead. Okay, it's really nerdy. So, but there's a text that it's like a grimoire written in cuneiform signs. It appears in only like one or two episodes that you see it. But yeah, so I was like, what is this? And the show said it was Sumerian. And actually, the way it relates to this show is that when I sent it off to an Assyriologist friend, she just said, that's Old Persian. And I went, wait, what? I said, how could, well, I was like, of course you can tell, I suppose, but also, what? And so she was saying, like, oh, yeah. She's like, well, as an Assyriologist, we can tell because Old Persian is very much inspired by like the simplified forms of Neo Assyrian. And she was like trying to explain how, like, she was like, no, Sumerian's written in this like old sort of Babylonian style lapidary script. And I just was like having my mind blown like, wait, what? I was like, there's variations. They're based off each other. Wait, what am I doing? So, kind of all that to say, it's interesting because I would never have thought about, yeah, is it important to start with a certain language or not? Or if you start with one like Akkadian, does that lend well to, you know, teaching yourself Elamite or Old Persian or something, just because the sign forms are like derived from each other. So in that regard, I'd be like, I don't know. I don't think I'd be like, oh, take Sumerian if you want to read, you know, Old Persian right away. I don't know. So
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
why I
I think
asked.
traditionally it's sort of Akkadian and Sumerian, and then some of the others come after that. But I think Old Persian, in some respects, is more incredible than any of the others because it's a completely made up language. Like Darius the First just went ahead and said, I'm going to make up my own language and I'm going to use it in my royal propaganda. Like, I can't think of any examples in any other period of history of a ruler who went out of their way to make up their own language for their personal propaganda. I mean, that actually is a pretty incredible move. So it may be more simplified, but it certainly takes time to do something like that. So I give him props for that. I mean, I think Darius the First is really an incredible individual. I mean, he did a lot of things that set up the stage for a successful territorial empire. And it wasn't just in terms of, military, because he was great at that. But it was also, the satrapal system. It was material and visual culture. It was building projects. It was, the Bisitun inscription is really the first document that you could really consider to be anything like Persian historiography. That is his doing too. I mean, he really sets the bar pretty high at a very early stage for anybody that comes after him. So I think Old Persian is incredible. I don't know how to read it personally, but like I said, the only reason I don't is because those trilingual inscriptions, there's very little variation at times. There is, and that's important, particularly if it's a regional variation, because those are done to really speak to a different constituency. So those small changes are impactful changes. But I just think that he's a really interesting guy. I mean, he had a whole idea of empire in his head and he executed it. So I think he's great. And I mean, you can see his stamp. So I had the great pleasure and privilege of going to Iran on a guided tour that was it was sponsored by the Archaeological Institute of America, but Margaret Root was the expert guide. So at the time, she was one of my dissertation advisors, and so she found some money to help me go on this tour. And we spent, I think, like 3.5 or 4 weeks just riding a bus, 2,000 kilometers all over Iran. And it was really quite an incredible experience. But to see things like Pasargadae and Persepolis in particular. We spent a couple days at Persepolis, and to see the Bisitun inscription, I mean, you have to go there in person to really understand how insane this thing is. I mean, it is literally on the top of a cliff. We stood at the bottom of it, and these shepherds were bringing their sheep across the land. And you could really imagine that this is exactly how it would have been for people who were passing by this in ancient times. And you can't see it. You can't see anything. I mean, you can see sort of general outlines, but you cannot see the iconography. You certainly can't see the cuneiform on it. And just to imagine how these people created scaffolding to get up there, to inscribe this beautiful art, and to know, I mean, they've done testing on it to see if there had been paint or other kinds of colors. There seems to have been some gold trim on it, so perhaps it would have been shiny and you would have been able to see it better, in ancient times. But just the sheer amount of labor and time that it would have taken to create this monument is really evident if you go there in person. And you really understand at that point that everything the Persian kings are doing, particularly their rhetoric, it's really directed towards the gods because humans just can't touch it. And very literally, especially in that particular case. So, and that was Darius's monument. So he's an incredible founder of an empire, really. I would say, the most comprehensive and holistic founder of an empire that we had up until that time.
Well, that's fascinating and I love it. And that's a lot of effort to go to. But like, hey, he had the time, he put in the effort. So I'm like, this is, I guess, what you just do when you're like founding an empire and you're like, I have time on my hands. I got this. But I love that you brought up the trip to Iran you took with Margaret Coolroot because we had her on this podcast earlier in this season, actually. And so I had a great conversation. And she mentioned that trip, I believe, as well. And if she didn't, she might have mentioned it off camera. So sorry, guys. I don't remember if she did. Great. If she didn't, sorry. But as someone who, for her work especially, who does a lot of art, and for people who, they kind of need the material culture part, I'm sure that was like amazing and like the best thing. So I wanted to ask though, because obviously, like you do some material culture, but not, that's not like the brunt of your work. And so just as someone who had this experience and got to go to Iran and see stuff. I mean, as
Mhm.
we know, I mean, I'm just going to preface it and say, yeah, of course you should go there. But, how much of a hindrance is it, even for the history side, right, to not be able to really go
Mm.
there these days? Because, I mean, from everyone who I've been able to talk to who has been there in some capacity, they just say, it just makes studying things easier. And as someone who does like Alexander and warfare and stuff, I'm like, if you can't kind of get to see these sites, like, is it harder in some way? Is it really not? Just because we do have some things, that we can use, but, you got to go. And I'm sure that's pretty special. And a lot of people would love to have been able to do that.
Yeah, so I would say for me, it's more of a kind of intangible benefit because, and I'll say too, I'm happy always. I have a lot of colleagues who work on these things and ask me for pictures of things that I took, and I'm always happy to share those because now, particularly if you're American, it'd be impossible to go there. And it was hard enough when we went in 2011. But I would say that the resources are available. I mean, we can look at photographs of things. We can very clearly see what the visual culture looks like, but it makes it feel more alive. It makes the culture feel more alive when you can walk around and see not just the things that are. So, for instance, something that was really striking for me when I went there, like I sort of already knew this, but there's a lot of controversy over Alexander's burning of Persepolis, he destroys the platform that's the symbol of Persian kingship. I think that Sankisi Verdenberg did a great job of showing that this wasn't a total destruction. And when you go there, you can really see that, I think, better than when you read about it. So you can see, like, the Palace of Darius the First on that complex is clearly in much better shape than any other place. And so it becomes very real and very alive. And one thing that really struck me when I was there, just sort of walking around, is there is what they often call the unfinished gate there. And we think that I think scholars are almost certain that this was under construction during the reign of Darius the Third. And I could just imagine the panic that was ensuing at Persepolis upon the news of the arrival of Alexander. And you can almost see people dropping their tools in the middle of making this gate because there's sort of just like a half of a lion there and leaving because this conqueror is descending upon them. And you just don't get that feeling if you read that, okay, there's an unfinished gate, or you even see a picture of it. But you can really sort of imagine things a lot better. You can visualize it a lot better when you can get sort of a full view of the site and you can see all the tombs to the Persian kings that are sort of behind the platform. It's much more than just like a royal palace center. I mean, their tombs are there as well. There's the PFA tablets, the archive tablets aren't super sexy to tourists, but these are in like a completely different area of the platform. So you just can see that it's more of just a symbolic center. It is, an entire complex to the empire, because I think people often, not scholars really, but sort of tourists, forget that, this is a place where they're receiving taxes and tribute. There are these sort of regular visits from international ambassadors, so you have to set the place up so that it is an entire picture of your empire, and it's really a successful picture, I think, when you go there. So I would say, and I remember driving around on in that bus, and everything, it's such a beautiful country. There are beautiful mountains. The food is completely incredible. Like, you can still get a really great feel for how the ancients would have experienced it, because there are a lot of places that look pretty much the same as they probably would have in the ancient world. I mean, there are still nomadic tribes, and you can sort of see their encampments from the bus. So you do really get a feeling of what that kind of campaign journey would have been like, or maybe what persons traveling down the royal road would have experienced. So I would say there's an intangible benefit. It does make you want to continue studying more than if you're sort of stuck here in a library just reading about it. And I think that's true for any place. I mean, if you go to Greece, if you go to Rome, then most often sort of lights a fire under you to continue doing what you're doing.
Mm, yeah. I mean, look, I'm never going to argue, that you shouldn't go someplace. So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's just something as someone who doesn't really do Persia, I was like, oh, yeah, it's something I just don't ever really think about. Because I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to go to Greece. But yeah, yeah, yeah. And I
Well, and
also
the
just
nice
love
thing
travel.
is, yeah, I mean, the nice thing is too, like, if you've been to both, then you can really see how different these cultures are from one another and how much they could learn from each other. You could really see, that they had really productive interactions. I mean, everybody always just thinks about war, but it's not just that. I mean, people will ask, why is there a statue of Heracles? just kind of hanging out on a cliff in Iran. And, what is the Penelope doing there? I mean, so they're clearly interacting with one another in productive ways, and they have so much to learn from each other. And you can really see that when you can see sort of the distinctions between those ancient cultures in person.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to pivot us because you mentioned grand strategy. Look, we've had a lot of people who do very different aspects of certain things, including warfare. But I think our audience deserves to hear a little bit more about that because we've had some more the logistics side. We have Rolf Strootman on last season who talked a lot about sort of the women around Alexander and how, they had political parts to play and stuff. So this is something different, and I'd like to bring that to our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna sound like a Darius the First fangirl, but maybe that's just what I am. I think he really sets up the empire to be successful in imperialism very early through a sort of tripartite program that's focused on money. And so he really does sort of set up the empire such that they can receive taxes and tribute and use them appropriately. He also sort of sets up a standardization of political and military structures such that they mirror each other and not just in the capital, but also in the satrapies, which tend to be these sort of microcosms of the capital. And one of the things that I actually think is most impressive about what he does is he institutes a system whereby the Persians are ready to react. I'm not saying that they constantly have an army at hand, but they're ready to react both on land and on sea. Should there be some kind of untoward event or something that they need to respond to, he's got them ready. So, admittedly, Cyrus sets up some of these precedents and Darius just kind of improves on them, but they're very keen on ensuring stability, but also, I would say, loyalty to the empire by making people dependent upon them through monetary contributions to the empire. And so a lot of these are supporting military production and the professionalization of the army. We also see the sort of institution of a gift-giving structure that produces a loyalty to the king and the empire in a way that can be utilized in sort of a both a military and a political way. And they also are not afraid to pay mercenaries to fight for them. So they are an incredibly diverse empire. They are a sort of universal empire, and they are happy to use those diversities to their advantage. And I think that is part of their strength for a long period of time, is that, for instance, when they're fighting against Greco-Macedonian troops on their own soil, they can fight them with Greek troops. And that's a difficult thing because if you know anything about Greek warfare, for a long time, the traditional sort of hoplite phalanx warfare resulted in stalemate because you're just pitting, equivalent warriors up against each other. And until they start to figure out that you need to change some of the construction of the phalanx on the battlefield for a while, it's just not very effective. And so the Persians see that and they say, well, okay, if we're gonna effectively fight, Greeks, then we're gonna use Greeks. If we want an advantage with light armed infantry, we'll use Scythians or cavalry, sorry. So light armed cavalry. You know that better than anyone, right? The Scythians have great horses. So, I mean, I think that they set themselves up to n- not be scared of the diversity of their empire, but rather to use it to their advantage. And that required a lot of money flying back and forth. And so we do see a sort of standardization of currency that becomes more developed as time goes on, particularly under Darius. There's, the tax and tribute system that also becomes more developed under Darius, and all of that is used towards military effort. And that is, of course, a part of imperialism. So, and there's also a lot of argument about, do the Persians really care about the Greco-Persian Wars? Or are the Greeks just sort of a nuisance that they have to take care of because they're bothering them on the periphery of their empire? And, I mean, I don't know if that debate is truly settled. I think it probably is more that the Persians are quite keen on the idea of loyalty and vengeance for breaking oaths, and the Greeks don't stick to their promises. And so the Persians have to, at least in their sort of ideological construct, they have to, do something about that. I'm not sure that they care about incorporating the Greeks into their empire per se. That is not the ones in Asia Minor. The ones in Asia Minor, yes, they have to have their thumb on top of the Greeks in Asia Minor. But does the Greek mainland really matter to the Persians? I'm not sure it does, actually. But, you know, Xerxes, whatever you think of him, it seems to have taken, the vindictive nature of the sort of Persian religious construct to heart and made sure that he went over there and did what he needed to do. But at any rate, that idea sort of brings me to the corollary to all of that, which is that as part of the grand strategy, and this is why I think this is really so brilliant. It's a holistic imperialistic ambition because not only are they collecting money, not only are they constantly ready to fight on land or sea, but they're also incorporating all of those things into their political messaging. So they're what I like to call soft power strategies. So their rhetoric, their visual culture, stuff like the Bisitun inscription, all of that seems to be pretty in line with the actions that they're taking. So they have certain things that they want to get done militarily and in terms of their empire. And all of that seems to match up to what they think and say about themselves, not just in the sort of central locations of the empire, but also on the periphery. And so I think that this is really their grand strategy is holistic. So they standardize everything from political and military structures, particularly in the satrapies. The messaging is more or less the same with some, changes also in the satrapies. That standardization goes not just for their political structure in the satrapies, but also into their military structure. So they seem to have a sort of recognized hierarchy of command, and that helps them function more effectively. And so I would say that in general, the Persians they're organized, they're holistic, they're comprehensive, and they are willing to accept and utilize the diversity of their empire for imperialistic endeavors. It's incredibly effective for a very long time.
My goodness. I think you just gave our entire audience so much to unpack there because my brain was working double time to try to be like, okay, process. Oh, that's really cool. Wait, process new information. Yeah. Especially since, the whole, I mean, I guess for me as a classicist, I do find for me the most, not most, but a super interesting part, right, is the use of Greek mercenaries. Because I'm like, yeah, getting Greeks to turn it against their own it's a big deal. It just doesn't feel like a, you know, easily done feat. So yeah, that aspect has always really interested me. Now, I mean, when we look at Alexander's conquest, I mean, look, man, we see where he went, we see where he did. It's really incredible to think about. Also, just because I think I was even trying to like measure sort of the modern, like sort of distance of where he went, and I was just thinking to myself, I was like, oh, that's super far. Like, how would one like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish I could like fully recreate and be like, I'm gonna follow the exact same route he took, but I'd have to go through parts of the world that I don't think I probably could easily or should be going. So maybe that particular task will have to wait.
Didn't someone did that already? I
The-
forgot the author. In the Footsteps of Alexander the Great is the book. And I think there was also a documentary
mm,
that went together with that book. I'm embarrassed that I can't remember who wrote it now. But yeah, and I think, that's partly what I was trying to do when I went to Iran is to see what he saw. And I love that kind of experiential learning. For instance, when I went to Greece in 2018, I hired a guide to take me back through the pass at Thermopylae so that I could see how the Persian troops would have surprised the Greeks, from the rear, and how difficult actually that would have been. And like my trip through Iran, it was so authentic because it was still, there were streams, there were rocks and roots and stuff everywhere. We ran into a snake that had something in its belly because it had a big bulge in it. So it felt very authentic. It took us, I think it was something like 7 hours to do the hike. It was about 13 miles. And so you really got an idea of how difficult it would have been to send an army behind that pass. So I love doing stuff like that because it really gives you an idea of, reading Herodotus is one thing, but doing Herodotus is a totally different thing. So, or anyway, you got me. So yeah, I think, that kind of experience is a really important thing. So yeah, I mean, and it gives you a better appreciation for how difficult the conditions were that they were working with and how well they dealt with them, I think.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, look, there are a couple different ways. Again, you can sort of you can read the book, you can listen to someone else's account, you can look at pictures. Like, there's a lot of ways, especially today, right? More than ever, that you can kind of do your best to recreate things and get a good sense of what things were like. Now, people, longtime listeners for this show know I do like talking about media stuff. And now I do have a bone to pick with Hollywood just because I'm like, if we get anything, it's like usually an Alexander movie. It's always Alex, but like they always, I mean, rightly so, I suppose, just for entertainment value, they focus on like him specifically. What part is he in? You don't get any sense of or much sense of, sort of daily life in like
Hmm.
in the camp, or like if you're on the Persian side. They don't actually show the Persian side for much more than, 5 seconds, especially in things like the Oliver Stone Alexander, which is sad. And so, one thing I feel like I've just talked to people who are kind of clamoring for is something that really would go more in depth and show us more like the Persian side, you know. And so, we have things like the Alexander movie. We have the Netflix documentary on Alexander, which I suppose tries to show us a little bit of the Persian side. It still obviously is Alex dominant. But, just thinking about some of these things that we've done, do they, I don't know, like, do they come close? Like, do they do a good job in helping sort of capture and show us, could we do better? I still feel like I've talked to people who are like, I appreciate this for what it was. We got another look into something, but, it's not quite there. It's not quite what we're hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, the Oliver Stone movie is what it is. I know that the creators of the Netflix documentary really tried to be intentional about including the Persian perspective. I think that, scholars like Pierre Briand have done a lot of work to help us change the sort of vision that we get through the Alexander historiographers, particularly about the weakness, the essential weakness of the Persian Empire. We tend to get this idea from the Alexander historiographers that it was inevitable that the Persians were going to lose this war and that their leadership was somehow weak or less, effective or powerful than Alexander. To some extent, that's a lot of hindsight. And I think that we don't give the Persians enough credit for what was truly a quite strong empire, even when Alexander invaded. I think that the Persians lost that war largely because of military generalship and not because of an essential weakness of the empire. So, there will be a lot of opinions about that, but I think this sort of, scare quotes, effeminate Persian king who was only interested in drinking and hanging out with eunuchs and, sitting around in luxury. I think that's still a sort of a centralizing view that is coming from primarily Greco-Roman sources. And frankly, even if they were doing that stuff, they were still getting it done. So more props to them. I mean, they are an empire, they're a monarchy, and so go ahead and act like it. As long as everything is getting done and the tribute is getting delivered and the satrapal revolts are, being conquered and, Egypt isn't rising up against you, then you do you, So, I mean, I think that people maybe it's just not sexy to think about the Persians as a equivalent opponent. And so there has to be some sort of inevitability in Hollywood regarding their loss to Alexander. But I don't think that we actually have any objective source material through which we can get that impression. So I think that Hollywood can try to do right by the Persians, but they may never do it because it might not make for good TV.
Unfortunately, yes, that seems to be the dominant opinion. Although sometimes I wonder though, because like the more I talk to people, especially who do like Achaemenids and stuff, they're like, yeah, we run into the Alexander problem because he's there. These are his opponents. Like this is, it's just, oh, well, we can't avoid that, and that's going to be the sexy thing. So sometimes I wonder if it's not even just like the Persian Empire in general isn't sexy. I'm like, well, maybe it's just the problem of the time period of if you're gonna do Achaemenids, you're like, well, look at what was happening because there's maybe, more quote unquote entertaining things you could kind of put on and just have the Persians be your enemies. I mean, I don't know if you go further in history, further forward, maybe you could find I don't know. You could have something like, says exciting Sasanian something, or I don't know, do like the Parthians in Rome. Although if you get into Rome, then Hollywood makes Rome sexy too much. Look
Hmm?
at this trend about, thinking about the Roman Empire. Okay, so maybe don't do the Parthians in Rome, but yeah, get to like the Sasanians or something and then be like, see, they're sexy, they're powerful, they last a long time. So
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just I'm asking the wrong questions or I'm asking people who somehow all just do Achaemenids. And then it's just, wrong place, wrong time. I don't know.
But now that I think about it, it does have a lot to do with the surviving material, though, because the Persians don't have this sort of epic tradition. They don't have a Homer, they don't have a Herodotus. Well, they have a Herodotus, but they have a biased Herodotus. And so what we do have are these very programmatic royal inscriptions. And if, like any standard college student or even graduate student, you are sitting in a classroom and you're reading, it's natural, I think, to prefer reading Herodotus over Persepolis fortification archive tablets. Because frankly, how many sheep are being traded for how many sigloi is not that exciting. And so I think that is another reason why going to the place and seeing it for yourself can change things for you because the Persians are a very sort of visual empire. They pronounce their power, they project their power through visual material, and so you have to appreciate them for their different media, I think. And that's what Hollywood has struggled with is that they don't have the same kind of material associated with them, and so it's just easier. I think I don't want to call Hollywood lazy, but it's easier to, focus on a culture that produced more that we can just sit down and read in our living room. And so that's a problem for the Persian viewpoints, I think.
No, that's fair. And it's true. Like I wouldn't, I mean, maybe a few years ago I'd have been like, no, they're just lazy, they can do it. But you know what? No, you're right. There's truth to that because yeah, it's multi-layered is what I would say. Because I feel like then you do run the risk, especially with something you don't have a lot of evidence for. And I feel like I've seen people try this to varying degrees, which, and like the reception to these things are, they run the gamut. So like I understand that fear because it's like if you don't have a lot of material, you definitely it like opens you up creatively because either you can do the thing where you're like, look at that, I can create my own story because we don't really have anything. But then you do get accused of like, well, it's fantastical, so it's not. We can't
Hmm.
say it's historical. It's not based in history. It's not based in anything, which automatically I feel like turns off a segment of the
Right,
audience because then you're
right.
automatically like, it's like the difference between give me something vaguely based in history. It's cool. You're like a Vikings TV show where you're like, oh, well, these are like real characters. What you're doing with them kind of is different, but also it's kind of like they can use the same beats. Like, oh, this mythological sort of semi-divine, whatever, Ivar the Boneless, if he really existed, sort of died here. So you can kind of insert whatever, which is very different, I'm sure, from just like a full Game of Thronesified Persia where you're like, oh, that didn't happen. Great. So I can see where people would be like, I don't want to do that because I don't want to be accused of just being a Game of Thrones like fantasy set in Persia. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
but there is a bit of a double standard, right? Like, why are we okay with romanticizing the Greeks, but not, I think that there is a lot of sort of political, socio-cultural stuff tied up in this, but I think, one of the ways that we could get around that is, for instance, in the Alexander documentary, I mean, they really tried to recreate Babylon in a faithful way. And I think that's a way to make the Near East accessible to audiences, is to embrace that material and visual culture and show it to people who are not going to be able to get there, so that when they do read about in Herodotus about how Semiramis built Babylon, they can actually see it because that makes a difference. But yeah, I mean, I think there is a bit of a fear about the lack of source material and what would need to be done to fill out the picture just because of a lot of different, aspects of, modern political and social culture. But I also don't think that it shouldn't be done or shouldn't at least be attempted because of those reasons either.
No, I would totally agree with that as well. I like it when people take risks. I think, it's kind of high risk, high reward, but I think it should still be attempted because sometimes you will get something really great and then sometimes, not so much, that, but that hasn't stopped people again from other things. Like again, the Oliver Stone to some people is just like undigestible or 300 is. That didn't stop them from making another one, did it? So I'm
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
and it's like the critics, I think, hated it too. They were just like, what is this? This is terrible. And yet they again invested to make another one. So I'm no, I definitely agree there because I'm like, even if something's crap, if enough people like your crap, they're gonna make
Hmm.
another crap part two. I can't believe I just said that on a
Yep.
podcast. Please forgive me,
First time
audience.
for everything.
It's okay. I think my audience has come to expect. They just know I like to talk about media stuff, and sometimes little off the cuff comments come out. But at this point in the podcast, I'm just going to throw a little love, everybody, to our guest because she was one of the main sort of talking heads on that Alexander doc. So everyone should go watch it and then send her wonderful flowers and notes and say she was wonderful in it. Other people were great too. And other people, we've had some other guests who also worked on that. So you can send them flowers too. But yeah, just recommend to anyone who wants to kind of see another attempt at bringing Persia to life. And so another former guest for everybody listening, Turaj Darye, he was on this show and he also was one of the talking heads. So you can go catch him as well. So that's just my little plug for everyone go watch this and learn something new if you haven't already.
Yeah,
But
Jones was great. And
yeah,
Carolyn was a guest too. Yeah, I mean it was a great cast that they put together. And I was glad they really, at least it was expressed to me that Lloyd was brought on particularly to illuminate the Persian perspective. And that they really did do as much justice as their license could provide. So I mean, I thought they did a good job with that documentary. I know they were kind of on a low budget, but they did I mean, it was well balanced, I think. Well balanced in terms of sort of history and entertainment and, all of those things. And like I said, they did their best to sort of recreate some of the scenery. I really just think that's important when we talk about ancient Persia, just because they're so reliant on that aspect.
yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I enjoyed it, so I will recommend it to people and say, hey, this is a fun watch. Like, if you know some of the stuff, great. If you don't, you'll learn, hopefully. But so this is the plug. So listeners, go forth and watch that if you have Netflix. I want to pivot us now. So there are two questions that I normally like to ask guests at the end of each of these podcasts. And you can answer this however you like. And I always say to people who definitely are just not like pure Iranologists, take this however you will in the context of your work and whatever way you want and run with it.
Interested in learning more about the wonders of ancient Persia? Visit the UCLA Archaeological Gazetteer of Iran. The Gazetteer digitally preserves famous locations, World Heritage sites, and lesser known areas from all time periods of ancient Iranian history. You can explore using the interactive map or visit the encyclopedic catalog for updates to the ever-growing list of archaeological sites. Visit www.irangazetteer.ucla.edu and learn more about what the Archaeological Gazetteer of Iran has to offer.
So the first of these questions is, what in your opinion is the greatest legacy left to us from ancient Persia?
I would say that they've left a legacy of how to be a successfully tolerant empire, how to be a very large territory that included really hundreds of different constituencies, everything from, you know, sedentary cities to nomads, so many different languages involved, so many different cultural traditions involved. And they allowed those things to continue to exist so long as obviously everyone still had to contribute to the imperial center, but they recognized that allowing people to continue maintaining their government institutions, their religious institutions, their belief systems, everything, their language, that creates a tolerant and more peaceful experience for both rulers and ruled. And I think that is an example for the future for everyone, really, is this sort of th this legacy of tolerance, of diversity, of acceptance of that diversity, of learning and understanding how to use that diversity and appreciate it, So I think that they did a really fantastic job of that. It's not that they didn't cause pain. They had some of the same practices as the Assyrians. They deported people. They put down rebellions in violent ways, but they did have a sort of base policy of tolerance. And I think that is something to be admired, especially in the ancient world where violence is an easy answer.
Fair. There's no right or wrong answer, which is nice because it's such a subjective question. And so I'm going to hit you with another very subjective question.
Okay.
So the second question is, what, in your opinion, is the greatest legacy that we, as current scholars in Iranian studies and adjacent fields, can leave for future students of Iranian studies?
Oh boy. I think that it's important to study the Persians because they are living in a period with so much really drastic change. They learn how to take the successful examples from their predecessors. They change the things that didn't work for their predecessors. They created things to help them, become a successful empire. So, they built, the first essentially Pony Express system. They made up their own languages. They have a very sophisticated trade structure. So they really have a comprehensive approach to the world and to the way that they see their place in it. And I think that is something that we can all learn from, that you can't just apply one aspect of government, politics, culture, warfare, religion to a society and expect it to survive. You have to have a comprehensive approach to what is a sophisticated human population. And they got that. And I think that is a lesson for us now that we can really learn from. It doesn't have to be so specific, like, oh, Old Persian is a great language to learn because it's invented and it doesn't have that many characters. I mean, I don't think it has to be superficial like that. I think we can really take a lot from their approach to governance and they thought about everything. And I think that is something important for all of us is to really think hard about our holistic approach to life. And they certainly did that well, I think.
That's super fair. Okay, the last question is really, where can people find you? So I want to ask you questions, collab, all the things.
So I'm at Loyola University Chicago. So I am the chair of the classics department there. So you can find us on the Loyola website. And, we also have a Hellenistic historian that works on Egypt. So we do some of, other, time periods and parts of the Near East and Egypt. And there are some places that have a nice cadre of scholars in ancient Persia, and then others, actually, I would argue that most universities probably only have one. And so I'm going to be that one at Loyola. But, the nice thing about Iranologists is that we like to collaborate together to create something bigger. And so, there's a lot of international partnerships to be had. And, a lot of it's kind of a small crowd. We all kind of know each other. So if you contact one of us, you've contacted all of us in some way. So, anytime that you want to find me, I am there. And then if we need to bring in other people, then we know how to do that. So I think it's really important to study the Persians in all of their iterations because they have a lot to tell us about just life, not just in the modern or in the ancient world, but also in the modern world.
Great. Well, I'll link that in the show notes, and then people can hop forth, go to, and do
Conquer.
whatever. Yeah, exactly. So, man, thanks for joining me on the podcast today. And yeah, hopefully maybe we'll see you out at UCLA conference, something, anything,
I hope
maybe.
so. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Well, thank you for having me. And, I hope that we get, some more students interested in this stuff because I think, generally we have a crisis in the humanities right now, but I think that it's really important that we reiterate to people that the humanities are a way for us to understand our own humanity better, and we have to do that through the study of the past. So send them my way, and we'll keep the legacy going.
looking forward to it. Well, this has been great. Legacies of Ancient Persia is a Portavood podcast production, hosted and edited by Lexi Henning, with select episodes co-hosted by Marissa Stevens. Cover art provided by Hadley Leesman and original music by Brent Arhart. Established in 2017 as the premier research center for the study of ancient Iran, the mission of the Portavood Institute for the Study of the Iranian World is to engage in transformative research on all aspects of Iranian antiquity, including its reception in the medieval and modern periods, by expanding on the traditional domains of old Iranian studies and promoting cross-cultural and interdisciplinary scholarship. Thanks for listening to our show. It's available to stream on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Portavood Institute and at Portavood UCLA, or visit our website, portavood.ucla.edu. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and review us. For podcast inquiries or questions about the Portavood Institute, please email us at portavoodpodcastproduction@gmail.com. We'll see you next time as we continue our deep dive into the legacies of ancient Persia.